Well, hello and good morning, and welcome back to the Money Advantage podcast. So, this is Rachel Marshall, and today I am doing a solo podcast and conversation. And our typical host, Bruce Wayner, or co host, is not with us today, but I wanted to talk with you about generational wealth. So many people have heard of this concept of generational wealth, and there's a great aspiration towards generational wealth. And it's even a buzzword in the wealth community, in wealth advising, and in financial planning. This idea of having something that outlasts yourself. So today we're going to talk about what generational wealth is, what generational wealth isn't, and then really some tools that you need to be able to equip yourself and your family to create generational wealth. So the first thing that I wanted to just start by saying is that often there can be this concept that wealth is something that I build with a typical paradigm. And by typical paradigm, I mean that I'm working a W-2 job. I'm then putting money away for retirement or for saving for the future. And typically that's invested somehow in the market. And then the goal is to grow a certain dollar amount and accumulate this accumulation of net worth, and then to be able to use that pile of cash, if you will, and be able to use the interest, maybe a 4% or 2%, whatever's not going to consume the principal, and then be able to use that as an income stream or income source during retirement. And from that vantage point and that way of thinking about wealth and wealth creation, there's typically one main goal and one main driver, which is I want to make sure I don't run out of money, right? I don't want to be in a position where I retire at X date, I live till Y date, and along that continuum of time, either my principal is drained, or I have to reduce my income to make ends meet, or I have to go back to work. And so a lot of the conversation around wealth planning usually centers around when can you retire? How much do you have to put towards retirement during your working years? When can you retire? How long will that income stream off of that accumulated pile of cash last until the end of your lifetime? And how do you make sure that you don't use too much, you don't retire too early, you don't die too late? And really the main fear driving this is, how do I not run out of money? When we think from that lens, then generational wealth is simply a concept of saying, well, how do I have enough money that I can live well myself and still have leftovers to be able to pour into my children or to give to my children, to be able to not just use up for myself and be able to get into their generation. And that is usually what is thought of as generational wealth. So many people are thinking a volume of money so large that I can't use it up, so therefore my kids will get it. That's one way of thinking about generational wealth. Another way of thinking about generational wealth that is very common is thinking about having generational assets or things like real estate, hard, physical, tangible assets that continue to be able to provide value and economic benefit and advantage generationally that can be held long term. So both of those are really valuable perspectives of generational wealth, but I want to expand your mind even broader and really think about what is needed for generational wealth. If we think back, or if we think about families that we could point to say, this family has had wealth that lasted for generations, what does that actually mean? Well, that would mean that you have a family that somehow is living wealthy. They have financial capital. They're able to use that financial capital. Usually it's a family of influence, a family of means. And if we say it's generational wealth, we would need to then be able to look back to the generation before them that had begun a process getting wealth and capital and economic advantage and thriving to generation two. And if that family was even more successful, we would say, let's look back to not just generation one before them, but generation one before them. So generation one, two, and then now we're looking at generation three, and they have had this display of generational wealth, or they have retained family resources. They've continued to thrive over time, and they haven't stopped that thriving process. So what's different about the thinking needed to create that kind of generational wealth, where you can look at a generation and recognize that there were things that were put in place in the generation or generations before them, so that now you are seeing the evidence of generational wealth, the result of generational wealth. One family that comes to mind is the Rockefellers. Another is the Rothschilds. These families have been influential and wealthy for multiple generations. Anyone looking at that family today would recognize that it wasn't something that just happened by happenstance today, but there has been a track record of sustainable wealth and wealth passing, wealth transfer, wealth creation, wealth production over multiple generations. And that is true generational wealth. So how do we really think about generational wealth in a way that can put you in a context and a position of being able to be the starting point of generational wealth? If your goal is to create generational wealth, chances are you're looking at creating something beyond you. You have a desire and a dream and a value on family. You have goals and desires and maybe even dreams or a vision for your children that they would be able to prosper and flourish and thrive. And maybe you just have this tremendous amount of love for them and you want to see them be in a position of success. Maybe you're already a grandparent and you have grandchildren and you are coming alive to this idea that you have the ability to help them do more than maybe you were given, to be able to not have to struggle or be in a position of lack, to be able to start ahead and have their floor be your ceiling. And you're really wanting to do something that is investing in that future generation. I think this is a very healthy and natural desire that we have to do something that is valuable and beneficial in the coming generations. I mean, that was something that is implanted in us as humans from the beginning of time from God, because he created us in his image. He is infinite. He has impacts and worth and value that continues through the generations. And we are made in his image. We are in a position of wanting to do work that is more than just temporal, more than just the mundane today, more than just serving ourselves. We have this desire inside of us, if we listen to that, to be able to really last and to matter and to do something of eternal significance and eternal value. So let's take a look at generational wealth. And as I said, the evidence of generational wealth, if you're looking at a family who has passed on generational wealth for multiple generations, it's very easy to see the result of generational wealth. But I want to draw your attention to something that maybe is a little bit less obvious. And excuse me, that is that in order to have generational wealth, that multiple generations had to participate in the production of that wealth. So here's the difference from what most people mean to what you actually need to begin a process of generational wealth. Generational wealth is not just the ability to benefit from and use and consume. That word's probably going to be a little bit more emotionally triggering, but it's not just benefiting from and taking something that has been already produced by someone else. If we're thinking from that lens, we won't create generational wealth. So when you see a family that's able to reap the rewards of wealth that was produced in generations before them, you have to recognize that they themselves are also participating in the creation of that family wealth. They are valuing family and they're thinking about how to manage the resources that they've been given and how to grow them for future generations. So that participating in this chain or this string, this family line from before you to beyond you is really critical if you're going to create true generational wealth. So generational wealth is not just families that create wealth, like a flash in the pan, a instant success or a overnight business or selling a property and and instantly having millions at their disposal. That's not generational wealth. Generational wealth isn't a dollar amount. Generational wealth is instead families that keep wealth. And in order to keep wealth, each generation has to participate not only in the creation, but also the stewardship and the growth of that wealth. Sure, they can use it, they benefit from it, they get the advantage of being able to live wealthy, but they're also participating in the creation of wealth. And that is the key difference between a family that just is thinking, I can create as much money as possible today, and hopefully that's going to be generational wealth, and a family that is truly on a trajectory of creating generational wealth because they're training stewards to be able to take over the resources and be able to grow them larger than what they were given. So there's a few problems that you need to overcome from the typical paradigm, typical way of thinking, if you're going to create generational wealth. Really, the first is that your family is a unit or a team or a cohesive whole. It is something valuable as a group, not just as individuals. If you just think about individual people and individual wealth creation and individual wealthy individuals, you can't create generational wealth because you won't have that continuity, that line from one generation to the next of a perspective and a mindset and mentality of stewardship and creation and production. So if you, instead of thinking about your family just as a group of individuals or as individual people with individual skills and abilities who are going to go their individual ways and disperse at some point, if instead you begin thinking about a family as a unit or a whole and beginning to identify what makes that family a group, then you have something that you are creating a gravitational pull towards the family and towards commitment to family. And now you have something that you are instilling in the next generation, this desire and this value of family. And if they have the value of family, then they're going to begin to have the leverage and the vantage point to be able to see that generations beyond them are important and worth investing in. But if they're just thinking about themselves, then we get self-centeredness, we get short-term thinking, we get all of the things that prevent generational wealth. Now, I don't say this to disappoint anyone, but the problem is that often we think so much about money and finances and wealth as what it can get for us, what we can buy with it, what nicer house we can live in, how we can demonstrate or display the wealth that we have. If instead we think about how we can steward that wealth and be in a position of not just benefiting from it, but think about how we can take what we've been given and do more with it, and how we can have that cohesion and connection point of the family being a unit that is worth developing and investing in, then you have the foundation or the running track to be able to put generational wealth on top of. This requires each generation to think of themselves as a producer. There's a very long-standing proverb in the wealth industry, and it's called shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves. You might have heard of this terminology. It's also called, in some other cultures, clogs to clogs or rice paddy to rice paddy. But it's this idea that often you'll see wealth produced in one generation. They value hard work. They're industrious. They maybe came from lack. Maybe they went through the Great Depression. Maybe they went through poverty in an impoverished third world country, and now they found opportunity. They moved to a land of opportunity. Maybe they came to America. Maybe they started businesses, and they're in a position where they're producing, and they value not just what money can do for them, but they're valuing other people and the production of value for others. And they're the ones that begin to create wealth. The problem is then that person rises out of poverty, and then their children begin to grow up in a lifestyle of affluence, and they become accustomed to all of the things that money can do for them, but they're less committed to the values and the principles that created the wealth in the first place. What can happen then is now generation 2 begins raising generation 3. Generation three has no concept at all of what it took to create the wealth in the first place. When they lose sight of the stories, there's no family legends anymore. They lose the continuity and their roots back to how the wealth was created in the first place and to the commitment to their family, the cohesion of that family line. Now they're in a position where they're just looking at themselves, and of course, the natural instinct and the way of humanity is to be self-centered from that perspective and to think about, what can I get out of this? How can I live well? How can I have all that money can buy me? And the challenge is that that third generation usually is the one that leads the whole family line back into poverty because they consume and use up the wealth that was produced. So that shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves proverb is really this idea that wealth is often produced in one generation, and by the third generation, they're right back in that bad, negative financial landscape that they started from. And we don't want that. So generational wealth is the opposite of booms and busts in families, right? It's the opposite of creating wealth and skyrocketing a financial capital and then just having it gone in generation two or generation three. Really, the vision of generational wealth is to build and continue building so that each generation is equipped with more and more capital, more economic influence, more ability to impact, more capability to lead, more ability to change culture around them, more influence, and being able to be the hub and the leader of society and culture. So why do you want to create generational wealth? If you, instead of looking at just the mechanism for generational wealth, you begin looking at the why. Why is generational wealth important? Always, when you come back to the why, that's going to be your reason to create anything. And if you are disassociated or detached or divorced from a why, you'll never be able to get the traction and the motivation and the there's a word I'm looking for, the incentive, the internal compulsion to be able to create something, because you need to be able to have a vision that's very large and be able to make steps towards that, and then be able to have the confidence that comes from making those high quality decisions. And if you're going to create generational wealth, it has to be connected to a why. The why can't just be, I want to be the person who is known for producing a lot. If you are just looking at wanting to have the recognition, or even just the personal satisfaction of knowing that you've accomplished something great in creating a vast amount of capital, that still is not the seed that's needed in order to create generational wealth. It might get into generation two, but it's not going to continue to last and overcome that shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves proverb. So if you're going to create generational wealth, then not only do you need to be able to be a producer, then you need to have a tool or a framework for wealth production and stewardship to be able to give to your children, so they can give that framework of production and capital creation to their children. That is the underpinning of creating true generational wealth. Now, if you are a believer, a Christian, and I'm going to just speak to you right now, if you're listening and that's not your paradigm, this is still valuable for you to hear. But if you're in a position where you are saying, I want to make the greatest impact that I can, I want to preach the gospel, I want to be in a position of being a kingdom builder, I want to be in a position of having influence and being able to elevate the world around me, and be in a position of truly not just letting society slide in a position that is away from morals and principles and values, but you really want to be on the forefront of having influence, then a lot of that currency of the world system comes from financial monetary capital. And when you have more of that, you are able to have more influence. It's just the way that this world tends to work. And so if you're in a position of looking at your family as an economic engine or as a driver of enterprise and value creation, and you're able to have family wealth and generational wealth, you're going to be in a position of having that kind of influence that you are called to have. So, what mindset do we need to create generational wealth? It really starts by thinking differently. And we can look all around us for examples in every position under the sun. But if you recognize that most people around you are not creating generational wealth, then you can't use the same mindset that everyone else is using to accomplish a different goal. If you have a large vision, you're going to need a different strategy to accomplish that. And so often it starts from taking a perspective of ownership and control financially and being able to have assets that you control and you are holding within your family so that you have capital at your disposal to be able to invest in the family members and invest in the vision that God has given you. And when you are in a position of financial control, then you are going to be able to have the tools to create generational wealth. So thinking differently really starts from a position of saying, how do I not just use the typical paradigm? How do I not just put money in the bank and in the investment houses and put money into the stock market? And how do I not just build up a pile of net worth, but how do I instead create assets and buy assets that can remain in the family for generations? And how do I make sure that I train and teach my children how to build capital, have accessible capital, build assets, and have these assets continue to produce cash flow that will solve the financial concerns of not only my generation, but the generations after me. So as you begin to think differently, then you have your capabilities will expand and you'll be in a position of really controlling resources. One of the things that is really valuable in creating generational wealth, and I'm going to talk about this a little cautiously for two reasons. I'm going to share the tool. So the tool is using life insurance or using something that we call family banking. Now, there can be a challenge with just talking about a particular tool because our mind can shortcut and say, well, here's the strategy. I'm just going to use a particular strategy. Forget all the mindset stuff, forget all the why. Let's just figure out the what and the how to solve the problem. And too often people rely so heavily on a tool like it's like a magic pill. And we put our trust and our faith in that tool rather than in the vision that creates the ability to use a tool well. And what I mean is that there's no such thing as a tool that's going to solve all the problems. You really need to have the correct thinking around your wealth creation goals if you're going to use any tool responsibly and to its fullest potential. A lot of people, so that was the first reason. The second reason is that a lot of times people will say, well, if I have life insurance with a death benefit, the death benefit pays into generation two, there, I've created generational wealth. I gave them capital. The problem with that thinking is that if you're just thinking about how to get money to the next generation, that doesn't automatically create generational wealth. And we just talked about if you have a mindset in generation two of using up the money and of consuming resources and eating the capital or eating the seed rather than planting the seed, you're not going to have an impact on generation three because everything will be used up in generation two. So instead of just thinking about life insurance as a tool that gets a death benefit into generation two, which is valuable, it's just not the end of the story. Instead of thinking about that, we need to think about how we can use a tool to produce the fruit that we're looking for. And the real fruit is not just a dollar amount into generation two. The real fruit is a mindset of being a producer, not a consumer. The mindset of being a banker, the mindset of storing financial capital, the mindset of being in financial control, the mindset of having access to your capital, the mindset of not just paying interest because all capital has a cost, but being able to earn interest and earn dividends and earn the value and the benefits of starting businesses and having assets that produce income that flows into the family and the family resources. So that being said, family banking is a powerful tool to be able to create generational wealth. And I'm going to say the most important reason is not the death benefit. The most important reason that family banking can produce generational wealth is that you have a tool to be able to teach the next generation how to capitalize, how to store capital where you control, as a family, you control the parameters, you control the dynamic, you control the access to that capital, and you're in a position where you are valuing putting capital aside and holding that in your control, not just giving it to the bank, not just giving it to an investment or putting it in the market, but controlling and holding capital. Because then you have capital that you can use to invest in the family, which is the true wealth, not just the money, it's the people and the value of the social and economic, or the social and intellectual and spiritual and moral development, character building that you put into each family member that is going to create the true wealth in the future. So this tool of family banking allows you to train them in financial stewardship and financial literacy, two things that are completely critical and absolutely necessary if they, generation 2, are going to be able to have the vision to continue building wealth in future generations. So with that, I'm going to close here. What I'm looking for is families that truly want to create generational wealth, that have a group of children or grandchildren that they love and cherish and want to set their floor as your ceiling. Your ceiling, the highest height that you attain in your lifetime, will be the foundation that your grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be able to use to stand on top of and to be able to produce more and create more, not just to consume the resources that you're giving to them. So if your goal is truly to create generational wealth, I would love to talk to you. What you can do is I'm going to give you a couple of options. One, you can book a call with us at The Money Advantage, and this would be to really look at your financial landscape and say, how can I do what I'm doing better? How can I truly create generational wealth? I'm going to put a link beneath the show notes here that you can use to begin that conversation. And secondly, I'm going to encourage you to go get my book, 7 Generations Legacy, and that is available at 7generationslegacy.com, and you can get the book, the audiobook, and a bunch of bonuses that will help you begin building generational wealth for $4.99. So we'd love to get that in your hands so that you can start building generational wealth today. Thanks for being with me on this show. And please remember, in closing, success leaves clues. So model the successful few, not the crowd, and build a life and business you love. We'll see you next time.